You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The camera's red light blinks in the darkness of my Jerusalem hotel room. My hands won't stop shaking as I hold up the clay seal, turning it so that the ancient Aramaic text catches what little light bleeds through the curtains. 3 months ago, my team found something in the Valley of Hinnom, something that should have stayed buried for another 2,000 years. If you're watching this, then I'm either dead or I've disappeared. My name is Daniel Frost, and I need to tell you what happened before it's too late, before the guilt consumes me entirely. 6 months earlier, my life was different, simpler. I worked for Covenant Historical Research, a private firm that operated in the shadows of legitimate archaeology. We investigated biblical mysteries for people who had more money than morals, wealthy collectors who wanted to own pieces of scripture, religious institutions seeking proof of their particular interpretations. We didn't ask too many questions about our funding, and our clients didn't ask too many questions about our methods. The office in Boston was understated. Grey carpets, fluorescent lights, the smell of old books and older coffee. I've been with the company for 4 years as an archaeolinguist, translating dead languages and authenticating fragments of ancient texts. My team was small but competent. Elena Cross handled the historical research, a sharp woman in her 40s who could cite biblical apocrypha from memory and had a gift for finding connections others missed. She'd lost her position at Yale after publishing a controversial paper about non-canonical gospels, and I suspected she took this work partly as revenge against the academic establishment that had rejected her. Thomas Webb was our field archaeologist, ex-military, practical, with hands that could delicately brush away centuries of dirt or break through solid rock with equal efficiency. He was the kind of man who measured things twice and trusted only what he could see. He'd left the army after his unit had been ordered to secure an archaeological site in Iraq, and he'd watched looters destroy a Sumerian temple before the paperwork came through to stop them. He never talked about it, but I knew it haunted him. Our handler was Gregory Holt, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who always wore the same brown cardigan, regardless of season. He coordinated our assignments, managed client relations, and made sure we got paid. In 4 years, we'd solved minor mysteries. We'd located a disputed monastery in the Sinai where an early Christian sect had hidden texts describing Jesus' childhood. We'd authenticated a supposed fragment of the Gospel of Thomas, which turned out to be a 19th century forgery worth less than the frame it came in, and I'd enjoyed telling the smug collector who'd paid for our services exactly how he'd been conned. We'd found a collection of Dead Sea Scroll fragments in a private collection in Geneva, tucked away in a safe deposit box by a man who'd died without telling his family what treasures he'd hoarded. Nothing had prepared us for the Judas Commission. Gregory called us into the conference room on a Monday morning in March. Rain streaked the windows, turning Boston into a watercolour blur of greys and browns. He spread a series of documents across the table, his movements precise, controlled, like a card sharp revealing a winning hand. "Gentleman, lady, we have a new client, anonymous as usual, but the offer is substantial, $3 million to locate and document the tomb of Judas Iscariot." Thomas laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that echoed off the conference room walls. Judas doesn't have a tomb. According to Matthew, he hanged himself in the field of blood. His body would have been left to rot, thrown in a mass grave with other criminals. That's how they treated suicides and traitors back then. No burial, no marker, nothing. You don't honor a man who betrayed God. That's the traditional narrative, Elena said quietly. She was already leafing through the documents, her eyes moving rapidly across the pages. That look of intense concentration she got when something fascinated her. But there are other stories, older stories, that didn't make it into the canonical Gospels. Gregory nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Our client has provided research suggesting a tomb exists in the Valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem's Old City. Medieval records reference a sealed cave where, and I quote, the betrayer's bones scream for mercy. I picked up one of the documents. It was a photocopy of a manuscript page, the text in Latin, the parchment clearly ancient from the way it had been photographed. The edges were burned, as if someone had tried to destroy it. What's the provenance on this? 9th century Coptic monastery in Egypt. The monastery was abandoned in the 12th century after all the monks reportedly went mad. This manuscript was found in the 1960s during an archaeological survey. It describes pilgrims visiting a cursed site in Jerusalem. According to the text, 30 pieces of silver were buried with Judas's body. Visitors to the tomb reported overwhelming feelings of guilt. Several took their own lives shortly after their pilgrimage. One priest who touched the silver reportedly walked into the desert and was never seen again. Superstition, Thomas said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Medieval people saw curses everywhere. Bad harvest, curse, plague, curse. Stubbed toe, probably a curse. Perhaps, Gregory replied, tapping one of the documents with a thin finger, but the geographical markers in the text are precise. Valley of Hinnom, south-facing slope. A cave entrance marked with both Hebrew and Latin inscriptions. The manuscript even includes rough measurements and describes landmarks that still exist today. Elena, what have you found? Elena looked up from the documents. There was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Unease maybe, or excitement. With Elena, the two often looked the same. I've been researching this for the past week, ever since Gregory brought it to my attention. The Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna in Hebrew, was Jerusalem's garbage dump. In ancient times, bodies of criminals were thrown there to be burned with the trash. It was also associated with child sacrifice in older Canaanite religions. Parents would sacrifice their firstborn to Moloch in the valley, burning them alive in bronze statues heated until they glowed. By the 1st century, it had become synonymous with divine punishment, hell itself. Parents would tell their children that the wicked went to Gehenna, where the fire never stopped burning and the worm never died. Cheerful place for a tomb, Thomas muttered. The interesting part, Eleanor continued, pulling out her own notebook filled with that cramped handwriting only she could read, is that local legends have persisted for centuries. Even today, the Bedouins won't camp in certain parts of the valley. They say the ground is cursed, that no grass grows in specific areas and animals refuse to pass through. Goats will walk a mile out of their way to avoid certain sections of the ravine. I found a blog post from a hiker who tried to camp there in 2019. He left after 20 minutes, said he felt overwhelming sadness and heard someone counting money in the darkness. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me. So, we're chasing medieval ghost stories and internet rumours. This doesn't feel like our usual work, Gregory. Usually we're authenticating manuscripts, verifying provenances, working with tangible historical evidence. This is different. This feels like we're being hired to prove someone's religious fantasy. $3 million, Gregory said simply, and the number hung in the air like incense. Half on discovery, half on delivery of documented evidence and artifacts. The client wants photographs, video, carbon dating of any remains found, and if possible, retrieval of the silver coins mentioned in the texts. Retrieval, I repeated, letting the word sit heavy on my tongue. We're not archaeologists anymore, Gregory. We're tomb raiders. We're the bad guys from Indiana Jones. Gregory's smile was thin, almost paternal. We're researchers operating in legally ambiguous territories. We've always been tomb raiders, Daniel. We've just been polite about it. We document, we preserve, we ensure these artifacts go to people who will care for them, rather than leaving them to be destroyed by time or looters with less academic integrity. Or we steal them for rich people who want to own pieces of biblical history, Thomas said bluntly. He'd always been the most honest about what we did. Let's not pretend this is noble work. We're mercenaries with PhDs. That too, Gregory admitted without shame. Look, I'm not going to pretend this is purely academic, but the money is real and the research is legitimate. If this tomb exists, if Judas Iscariot was actually given a burial, that's historically significant, regardless of who pays for the discovery. It would rewrite everything we know about how traitors were treated in first century Judea. It would suggest he had allies, people who cared enough to give him proper rights despite what he'd done. The meeting ended with our agreement to take the job. We always took the job. The money was too good, and none of us had better options. I spent the next 2 weeks researching Judas, trying to separate historical fact from 2 millennia of theological interpretation, artistic embellishment, and outright fantasy. The facts were sparse. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 apostles, betrayed Jesus to the Sanhedrin for 30 pieces of silver. The kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane, a sign to the temple guards so they'd know which man to arrest in the darkness. The arrest, the trial, the crucifixion. Then, according to Matthew's Gospel, Judas was seized by remorse. He tried to return the silver to the chief priests, but they refused it as blood money, tainted by its purpose. He threw the coins into the temple, then went and hanged himself. Acts gives a different account, starker and more visceral. It says Judas bought a field with his blood money, then fell headlong in it, his body bursting open, his intestines spilling out onto the ground. The field became known as Akeldama, the field of blood, and for centuries afterward, nothing would grow there. 2 different deaths, 2 different stories. Scholars had argued for centuries about which was accurate, or if they were describing the same event from different perspectives, or if both were theological constructions meant to illustrate divine justice. But nowhere in canonical scripture was there mention of a tomb. Traitors and suicides weren't given proper burials in first century Judea. They were disposed of, forgotten, erased from memory, like the sins they represented, unless someone had wanted to preserve the evidence of his betrayal, unless someone had wanted to ensure that Judas and what he represented remained accessible for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, unless the silver itself demanded a keeper. We flew into Ben Gurion Airport on a Wednesday evening in late March. Jerusalem glowed on the horizon as we drove in from the airport, ancient and eternal, a city that had seen empires rise and fall and barely bothered to remember their names. The Temple Mount gleamed in the distance, the dome of the rock catching the last rays of sunlight like a crown of gold. By Thursday morning, we had secured our permits through the usual channels, bribed the right officials with the usual amounts, and hired a truck to carry our equipment into the valley. The Valley of Hinnom was less dramatic than I'd imagined. A steep ravine, cutting along the southern edge of the old city, filled with scrubby vegetation and scattered garbage that had accumulated despite regular cleanups. Apartment buildings climbed the opposite slope, their windows catching the morning sun, satellite dishes sprouting from rooftops like strange flowers. Traffic noise echoed off the ancient stones, the sound of modern life indifferent to ancient curses. But there was something about the place that raised the hair on the back of my neck, a heaviness in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm that never breaks. Even in the bright morning sun, shadows seemed darker here, longer, as if they had more substance than shadows should. The bird song that filled other parts of Jerusalem was absent here. The insects were silent. Even the traffic noise seemed muted, as if sound itself was reluctant to enter this space. Thomas noticed it too. He kept checking his GPS, his compass, as if the instruments might be malfunctioning, giving false readings in this strange place. Magnetic anomaly, he muttered, tapping his compass. Something in the rock formation is affecting the readings. We set up camp on the south-facing slope, in an area where, according to Elena's research and the measurements from the Coptic manuscript, the tomb should be located. The local guides we'd hired took one look at our survey maps, at the red X marking our search area, and refused to continue. "Bad place," one of them said in broken English. He was a young Palestinian man, maybe 25, with nervous eyes that kept darting to the slope above us. Very bad. Old curse. My uncle came here once, trying to find old coins for collectors. Thought he'd get rich. He found nothing. But afterward, he couldn't sleep. 3 weeks later, he hanged himself from a beam in his workshop. Left a note that just said, "I'm sorry," over and over. 30 times he wrote it. 30. "We don't believe in curses," Thomas said, counting out cash for the man's services. The bills crisp and American. The guide pocketed the money but shook his head vigorously. "Believe or not believe, curse doesn't care what you think. Curse just is, like gravity, like death. You can deny it exists, but it still pulls you down." As the guides drove away in their battered pickup truck, kicking up dust that hung in the still air, an elderly woman approached our camp. She was dressed in traditional clothing, all black despite the heat, her face weathered by decades of sun and wind into something resembling carved olive wood. She spoke in rapid Arabic, her voice urgent, pointing at the slope above us, and then at the ground, then making a gesture I recognized, warding off evil. Elena stepped forward, her Arabic better than mine. They spoke for several minutes, the old woman's voice rising and falling, her hands gesturing emphatically. Other words I caught. Silver, betrayal, death, never ending. Finally, Elena turned to us, her face pale. "She says we should leave. She says the silver still burns beneath the stones. It wants to be spent. It's been waiting 2,000 years for someone to spend it." "Tell her thank you for the warning," I said, trying to sound respectful. "But we're just documenting historical sites. We're not here to disturb anything permanently. We're scholars, researchers." The woman looked directly at me when Elena translated, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. Her eyes were dark, ancient, knowing in a way that had nothing to do with education or book learning. She spoke again, a longer stream of Arabic, her voice taking on an almost chanting quality, rhythmic and haunting. Elena translated haltingly, her own voice shaking slightly. "She says her grandmother warned her about this place, that 30 pieces of silver are buried here, but they're not treasure. They're a curse. Each coin carries a piece of the betrayer's soul. Whoever touches them inherits his guilt. The guilt of betraying God himself. She says her grandmother's grandmother knew a priest who came here in the old times, before her family's family. He touched one coin, just one, and spent the rest of his life trying to give it away. But no one would take it. He tried to throw it in the sea, but it washed back to shore at his feet. He tried to bury it, but he'd dig it up in his sleep. Finally, he tied it around his neck with a rope and jumped from the walls of the old city. They found his body with the coin still clutched in his hand." "Superstition," Thomas said again, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Something about the old woman's conviction was unsettling. The way she spoke with absolute certainty. The way she looked at us with something like pity. The woman spat on the ground at our feet, not in anger, but in ritual, sealing her warning. Then she walked away, muttering prayers under her breath, her black clothing making her look like a moving shadow against the pale stones. I watched her go and noticed something odd. Where her saliva had hit the ground, the dry earth seemed to smoke slightly, as if the moisture was evaporating instantly, despite the mild temperature. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The camp was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city, car horns and voices carrying on the night air. But underneath those familiar noises, I heard something else. A soft, rhythmic clinking, like coins being counted. Metal against metal, coming from somewhere beneath the ground where I lay in my tent. I lay there listening, telling myself it was my imagination. Settlement sounds in the limestone. Thermal expansion of rocks as the temperature dropped. Water moving through underground channels. Perfectly natural explanations existed for every strange noise. That's what I told myself. But the sound continued. Clink, clink, clink. 30 distinct impacts, then silence for exactly 10 seconds. I counted. Then the cycle repeated. 30 coins being counted over and over, somewhere in the darkness below. And between the counting, I heard something else, breathing. Laboured, wet breathing, like someone with damaged lungs struggling to draw air. At 2:30 in the morning, I heard movement outside my tent. I unzipped the flap to find Eleanor sitting on a folding chair, wrapped in a blanket, despite the mild temperature, staring at the dark slope above us, where our survey equipment waited for tomorrow's work. "You hear it too," she said. It wasn't a question. I sat down next to her, the metal chair cold beneath me. Could be anything. Underground water, settling rocks. Sound carries strangely in limestone formations. "It sounds like counting," Elena said softly, "like someone counting money. 30 pieces, then starting over. I've been listening for an hour. It never varies. Always 30, always the same rhythm, always the same pause. It's methodical. Deliberate." We sat in silence for a while, listening to that distant clinking. Finally, I said, "The old woman really got to you." "She knew something," Elena replied, pulling the blanket tighter. "Did you see her face? That wasn't superstition or folklore. That was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that gets passed down through generations because people saw things, experienced things that couldn't be explained away by rationality or science." "You're a historian," I said. "You deal in facts, evidence, documentation. You've spent your career separating myth from reality." "I'm a historian who specializes in religious texts," Elena corrected. "I've read hundreds of accounts of miracles, possessions, divine interventions, curses. Most of them are clearly fabricated or misinterpreted natural phenomena. Epilepsy mistaken for demonic possession, ergot poisoning creating mass hallucinations, earthquakes attributed to divine wrath, but some of them..." She trailed off, pulling the blanket tighter. "Some of them have a consistency that's troubling. Different cultures, different time periods, different religions, but describing the same things, the same effects, the same warnings. Maybe there's more in heaven and earth than our careful academic frameworks allow for." "You're saying you believe the tomb is cursed?" "I'm saying I believe something is down there. Something that's been waiting a very long time. Whether that's a curse or something else, I don't know. But I know I'm afraid in a way I haven't been since I was a child. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you're in the presence of something that doesn't follow the rules you thought governed reality." We didn't speak about it again that night, but neither of us slept. We sat together until the sky began to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue to pale gold, and still that counting sound continued below us, patient and eternal, and somehow knowing. The excavation began Friday morning. Thomas had identified a promising area where ground-penetrating radar suggested a hollow space roughly 12 feet below the surface. We started digging, careful and methodical, documenting every layer of soil and stone, taking photographs and measurements as we went deeper. The work was hot, exhausting, repetitive. Dig, sift, document. repeat. My back ached, my hands blistered despite gloves, and the sun beat down mercilessly. But there was also excitement building with each layer we removed. The radar didn't lie. There was definitely a void below us, and it was definitely man-made. The question was whether it was what we were looking for, or just another empty cistern from Byzantine times, one of hundreds that honeycombed the earth beneath Jerusalem. By Sunday afternoon we'd found it. The entrance was low, barely 3 feet high, deliberately collapsed and sealed with gypsum that had turned rock hard over the centuries. As we cleared away the debris, working carefully to preserve the seal for documentation, I noticed something odd carved into the stone surrounding the entrance. Inscriptions in 2 languages, Hebrew on the left, Latin on the right. I photographed both from multiple angles, adjusting the lighting to capture every detail of the weathered characters. Then began translating while Thomas and Elena continued clearing the entrance. The Hebrew was straightforward, stark, Mhir Habgidi, the price of betrayal. The Latin took me longer, the characters worn by time and weather, some letters barely visible. Mors nunc regnat. Death now reigns. Cheerful epitaph, Thomas said when I read them aloud, setting up lighting equipment around the entrance. Nothing says welcome like death now reigns. Really rolls out the red carpet. Look at the orientation, Eleanor said. She was kneeling at the entrance, her compass held steady, taking multiple readings to be certain. The entrance faces west, away from Jerusalem. Proper Jewish tombs from this period faced east, towards the holy city and the rising sun. They faced toward resurrection, toward hope, toward the promise of redemption. This is facing away. It's facing toward darkness, toward the setting sun, toward the end of all things. Whoever designed this wanted to ensure the occupant was cut off from any hope of resurrection. An insult, I said, understanding dawning. More than that, it's theological exclusion. Whoever's buried here is cut off from Jerusalem, cut off from God, cut off from any hope of redemption or resurrection. They're facing the darkness forever, turning their back on the holy city for eternity. This isn't just disrespect. This is active, intentional damnation. Thomas broke through the gypsum seal with careful hammer strikes, the material crumbling easily despite its hardness, as if it had been waiting for this moment, eager to release what it had contained. When the seal broke, air escaped from the tomb. Old air, stale and dead, air that hadn't moved in centuries. But underneath the mustiness was another smell. Copper and decay, sharp and organic, and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like fruit rotting from the inside. We waited an hour for the air to clear before entering. Standard safety protocol, though none of us wanted to be the first to voice our reluctance. The opening yawned before us like a mouth, black and hungry, and I had the irrational feeling that we were being watched from within, that something in the darkness was aware of us, waiting for us. Finally, Thomas volunteered. He was the practical one after all, the one who didn't believe in curses or counting coins or ancient warnings. Someone has to go first, he said, checking his rope harness. Might as well be me. He descended first with a headlamp and camera, rope secured around his waist in case of unstable footing. Elena and I waited at the entrance, listening to his footsteps echoing in the tunnel below, the sound distorting and multiplying until it seemed like a dozen people were walking down there in the darkness, an army of the dead marching in formation. It's steep, his voice called up, distorted by the stone and distance. Maybe 45 degrees, hand-carved steps, but they're worn smooth. Centuries of feet, maybe. Generations of people coming down here. And there's writing on the walls, lots of it. Every inch is covered. What kind of writing? Elena called down, her voice tight with tension. A pause that stretched too long. Then, I think you'd better come see this, both of you. I can't make sense of it. We descended one at a time, me last, each of us testing the rope before trusting our weight to it. The tunnel was narrow, forcing us to move sideways in places, our equipment bags scraping against stone. My headlamp beam caught the wall carvings Thomas had mentioned. Aramaic text, carved directly into the stone, covering every inch of the tunnel walls from floor to ceiling. But as I got closer, running my fingers just above the surface without touching, I realized something was profoundly wrong. "These are backwards," I said, my voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Elena was already examining them, her fingers tracing the letters without quite touching them, as if afraid of what might happen if she made contact. They're inverted. Every character is reversed, like a mirror image. Like they were carved by someone looking through glass, or like they were meant to be read from the other side of reality. "Can you read them?" Thomas asked from below, his voice strange and hollow. "They're prayers. Protective prayers. The kind you'd inscribe on a tomb to guard the dead, to ensure their peaceful rest and protect them from evil spirits. But written backwards, inverted like this, they become..." She paused, her face pale in the harsh LED light of our headlamps, her hand shaking slightly. "They become bindings. These aren't meant to protect whoever's buried here. They're meant to keep something in, to prevent something from getting out." "Something," I repeated, "not someone. You said something, not someone." "The prayers are very specific," Elena said, moving deeper into the tunnel, reading as she descended, her voice taking on a lecturing quality that I recognized as her way of dealing with fear. "They mention silver. They mention betrayal. They mention guilt that cannot die, that refuses to die, that will outlast the stars themselves. Daniel, these aren't guarding a body. They're containing an idea, an emotion made physical. These prayers are trying to trap guilt itself to prevent it from spreading into the world." The tunnel opened into a chamber, small, maybe 10 feet across, with a low ceiling that forced us to crouch or risk hitting our heads on the rough stone. In the center of the chamber was a stone ossuary, a bone box about 3 feet long, carved from limestone with surprising skill, but it was face down on the ground, lying on its carved lid, the base exposed to the air. "Another insult," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of our breathing. "The dead should rest properly. Their bones treated with respect and dignity. This is intentional desecration. This is someone saying that what's in this box doesn't deserve peace, doesn't deserve rest, doesn't deserve the basic dignity afforded to even the worst criminals." But what drew my attention, what made my breath catch in my throat and my heart stutter in my chest, was the circle around the ossuary. 30 silver coins, arranged in a perfect ring, each one equidistant from the next with mathematical precision that shouldn't have been possible to achieve by eye alone. They should have been black with tarnish, corroded by moisture and time into unrecognizable lumps of oxidized metal. Instead, they gleamed as if freshly minted, catching our lights and throwing back reflections that seemed brighter than they should be, as if the coins themselves were generating light, as if the silver held its own cold fire. I pulled out my camera to document the scene, years of training overriding my growing unease. The moment I raised it and looked through the viewfinder, the LCD screen flickered. Static burst across the display like insects swarming, like television snow, like the visual representation of screaming. I lowered the camera and it returned to normal. Raised it again, same result. The image dissolved into white noise the moment I aimed it at the coins, as if they were rejecting being photographed, refusing to be captured. "Electronics are going haywire," Thomas said. He was checking his phone, which showed a full battery but kept shutting off. The screen going dark and then flashing back to life with error messages in languages I didn't recognize. Some kind of interference, could be mineral deposits in the stone, certain types of magnetite can affect electronics, or underground water creating electromagnetic fields. "From what?" I asked, though I already suspected there was no rational answer we'd accept. "There's no power source down here, no electrical current, no magnetic field strong enough to do this. This chamber has been sealed for centuries. The only thing down here is stone and bone and silver." Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer that wouldn't sound insane. We worked carefully, photographing from different angles when the cameras would cooperate, taking measurements with old-fashioned tape measures when the electronic ones failed, documenting everything with the thoroughness our training demanded. Then came the moment we had to turn the ossuary upright. It took all three of us, the stone heavier than it should have been for its size, as if gravity pressed down harder in this chamber, as if the earth itself wanted to keep the box face down, wanted to keep whatever was inside hidden from the light forever. When we finally got it right side up and set it properly on the ground, we saw the lid clearly for the first time. A name was carved in Hebrew characters: Judas Iscariot, Yehuda Iscariot, Judas Iscariot. Below the name was a crude carving of a man hanging from a tree, his body limp, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, tongue protruding in the manner of death by hanging. But there was something else carved smaller beneath the hanging figure. 30 tally marks, carefully incised with obsessive precision, each one representing a coin, a piece of silver, a fragment of betrayal. And below those marks, a phrase in Aramaic that made my blood run cold and my hands start to shake: NELAYKHVLLMV. I cannot die. Dramatic, Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction, lacked his usual certainty. Biblical figures tended toward the theatrical. This is probably just someone's idea of eternal punishment, making sure Judas was remembered as the betrayer forever, a warning to others, a theological statement. "We should open it," Elena said quietly, but her hands were shaking too. "Document the contents. That's what we're being paid for. That's why we're here." The lid was sealed with resin, dark and ancient, but time and humidity had weakened it. With careful prying and gentle pressure from all three of us, we lifted it free. The smell that emerged wasn't decay. It was older than that, drier. The smell of dust and bone and time itself. The smell of something that had stopped being alive so long ago that even the memory of life had faded from its cells. Inside were bones, human bones, yellowed with age, arranged in a traditional Jewish ossuary. After a body decomposed, after the flesh had fallen away, and the soft tissues had rotted, the bones would be collected and placed in the bone box, a secondary burial meant to save space in the crowded necropolis. But something was wrong with these bones. They were arranged too deliberately, too carefully, with an attention to detail that spoke of ritual rather than simple burial. Femurs parallel, ribs stacked like firewood. The skull placed upright, facing toward the feet, as if the dead man was looking at his own body, contemplating what he'd become, forced to witness his own dissolution for eternity. And scattered among the bones, nestled in the spaces between ribs and vertebrae, gleaming in the harsh light of our headlamps, were more silver coins. 30 of them, identical to the ones on the floor. 60 pieces of silver total, double payment for double betrayal, or payment and interest compounding across millennia. Double payment, Eleanor breathed, leaning closer to examine them without touching, her breath fogging in air that had suddenly grown cold. 30 for the betrayal of Jesus, 34... For what? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. I don't know yet. But nothing in ancient burial practices is random. Every element has meaning, significance, purpose. If there are 60 coins instead of 30, it means something. It's trying to tell us something. Thomas was taking photographs, his camera clicking rapidly, working while it still functioned, while the electronics still cooperated. I reached into the ossuary to move one of the coins for a better angle, to position it so the camera could capture the details of its minting, the year it was struck, the symbols that would help us date and authenticate it. My finger brushed the silver. The world changed. I was standing in an olive grove at night. Torches flickered between the ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching toward a sky full of more stars than I'd ever seen. Stars that seemed close enough to touch. I could smell the smoke, acrid and real, smell the olive blossoms, heavy and sweet, smell my own fear sweat sharp beneath my robes, feel the cool night air on my skin, hear the whisper of wind through leaves, taste copper on my tongue. And I was walking toward a man I knew, a man I loved more than my own life, a man I was about to destroy. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, like a fist to the stomach that drove all the air from my lungs and left me gasping. Not my guilt, his guilt. Judas's guilt, so powerful, it had weight and texture and taste and temperature. It filled my mouth like copper, like blood, like the tang of silver coins held between your teeth to test their purity. It pressed down on my chest like stones, like the stones they used to execute adulterers, crushing the breath from my body. It burned in my veins like poison, like the slow fire of betrayal, consuming me from within. I raised my hand to the man's cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the roughness of his beard, the simple humanity of him. And I leaned in, my lips brushing his cheek, and I kissed him, sealing his fate with an act of false affection. "Hail, Rabbi." The soldiers rushed forward from where they'd been hiding in the shadows, their armor clanking, their voices rough with excitement and righteousness. The man, Jesus, looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and understanding and something else. Something that might have been pity, or might have been forgiveness, or might have been both. "Friend, do what you came for." The guilt multiplied. It doubled, tripled, became infinite and crushing. Every particle of my being screamed with the wrongness of what I'd done, with the magnitude of the betrayal. I wanted to take it back, to undo it, but time only moves forward and some actions can't be unmade. The soldiers led Jesus away, chains rattling, voices raised in accusation, and I was left alone in the olive grove, holding the leather purse that contained 30 pieces of silver, feeling their weight like they were made of lead instead of precious metal, like they were made of condensed guilt, given physical form. The weight of those coins was unbearable. They were burning my hands even through the leather, burning with cold instead of heat, burning with the knowledge of what they represented. I'd sold him. I'd sold God made flesh. I'd sold the infinite for the finite, the eternal for the temporal, love for silver, for money, for 30 pieces that suddenly seemed like the smallest amount in the world. An insulting pittance, a joke of a price for the infinite. I snapped back to the present. I was kneeling beside the ossuary, my hand still extended toward the coins but not quite touching them. The vision had hit me, the moment my skin came within an inch of the silver, as if the metal carried an electrical charge that jumped the gap, as if the guilt itself reached out to claim me. "Daniel." Elena was looking at me with concern, her hand on my shoulder. "You okay? You've been staring at the box for a full minute without moving. We thought you'd had a stroke or something. Your eyes were open, but you weren't responding." "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded normal, but inside I was screaming. Inside I was still standing in that olive grove, feeling the weight of infinite betrayal pressing down on me. "Just tired. The air down here is thin, makes you lightheaded." I stood up too quickly and hit my head on the low ceiling. Stars burst across my vision, white and sharp, and when they cleared, I saw Thomas examining one of the coins from the floor, having plucked it from the perfect circle. He held it up to his headlamp, turning it to catch the light, oblivious to what I'd just experienced. "These are Tyrian shekels," he said with the confidence of someone who'd studied ancient currencies. "Standard temple currency in 1st century Judea. High silver content, about 14 grams each, minted entire. If these are authentic, and they certainly look it, they're worth a fortune just as artifacts. The historical value is immense, but 60 of them, in near-perfect condition? This is an incredible find. This could rewrite what we know about Judas's death, about how traitors were treated, about burial practices for the condemned. I wanted to tell him not to touch them, wanted to warn him about what I'd experienced, about the vision, about the guilt that came screaming across 2,000 years like a physical force. But what would I say? That I'd had a hallucination, that I'd felt a ghost's emotions. He'd think I was losing my mind, that the stress and the strange atmosphere had gotten to me. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the old woman's warnings and the counting sounds and the backwards prayers had primed me for suggestion, and my brain had manufactured an experience that fit the narrative. The human mind is capable of extraordinary self-deception when given the right prompts. But it had felt so real. More real than real. Hyper-real. In a way that normal memory never is. In a way that even vivid dreams can't match. I could still taste the copper on my tongue. Still feel the weight of those coins in my hand. Still hear Jesus' voice saying, "Friend, do what you came for," with that terrible understanding. Instead of speaking my warning, I did something I still can't fully explain, something that violated every principle of archaeological ethics I'd ever learned. When neither Thomas nor Eleanor was looking, when they were focused on photographing the inside of the ossuary, I slipped one of the coins from the floor into my pocket. The moment the silver touched my fingers, I felt it again. That overwhelming surge of guilt and grief and betrayal. But this time it was manageable, like background radiation, present but survivable. A constant pressure rather than an overwhelming wave, and underneath the guilt was something else. Hunger. A desperate, aching need for the coin to be passed on, to be spent, to transfer its burden to another person. The silver wanted to move, wanted to be exchanged, wanted to spread its curse to new vessels. It was alive in some fundamental way, or the guilt it carried was alive, seeking new hosts like a virus, seeking new cells. We spent another hour in the tomb, documenting everything, taking samples for carbon dating, measuring and photographing, until our batteries began to die and our hands grew too cold to work properly. Then we carefully resealed the ossuary lid, left the chamber exactly as we'd found it, and made our way back to the surface. None of us spoke during the ascent. We climbed in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, each carrying something we hadn't brought down with us. The sun was setting when we emerged, painting the Valley of Hinnom in shades of red and gold and purple. The valley glowed like it was on fire, and for a moment I understood viscerally why this place had been associated with hell, with divine punishment, with the burning of offerings to angry gods. It looked like the world was ending, like Judgment Day was arriving with the sunset, like the sky itself was bleeding. Back at camp, we catalogued our findings with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd done this work hundreds of times. The photographs were perfect where the cameras had worked, clear documentation of everything we'd found. Gregory would be pleased. Our anonymous client would have their proof. $3 million for a day's work seemed like robbery, seemed like we were the ones committing the crime, rather than documenting ancient ones. But something was wrong with me. I kept touching the coin in my pocket. My fingers found it constantly without conscious thought, like a smoker reaching for cigarettes or a drinker reaching for a flask, like an addict seeking their fix. The metal was warm against my skin, warmer than it should have been, warmer than body temperature, as if it generated its own heat. And every time I touched it, I felt that surge of emotion. Not my emotion, his emotion. Judas's impossible, eternal guilt, preserved in silver like an insect in amber, like a disease in a laboratory sample waiting to be released. That night, I tried to sleep but couldn't. The coin burned in my pocket even though I'd left my pants hanging on a chair across the tent. Even though there was no possible way I could feel it from that distance. The sensation defied physics, defied logic, but it was real nonetheless. Finally, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I gave up and went outside. Elena was sitting by the dead fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the dark slope where the tomb entrance lay, hidden beneath canvas tarps and equipment. Her face looked haunted in the starlight, older than her years, carved by shadows into a death mask. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, sitting down next to her on the cold ground. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him, Judas, walking back toward Jerusalem with a rope in his hands. He's looking for a tree, for a high place where he can end it, where he can escape the guilt. He wants to die, but he can't find the right spot. He keeps walking, searching, and the sun won't rise. It stays dark, suspended between night and day, and he keeps walking forever through that grey twilight, carrying his rope and his guilt like physical weights, like chains that grow heavier with every step." "It's just stress," I said, but I didn't believe it, and she could hear the lie in my voice. "We've been working too hard, sleeping in tents, breathing bad air, in that tomb. Carbon monoxide from our lamps maybe, lack of oxygen. The mind plays tricks when it's deprived of proper rest." "I took coins," Elena said quietly, not looking at me, her voice flat and confessional. "From the chamber. 3 of them. I don't know why. I needed to. Like they were calling to me, like they knew my name, like they'd been waiting for me specifically. When I picked them up, I felt this rush of completion, like I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life without knowing it." "How many?" I asked, though she'd already told me. 3. You?" "1, I admitted. From the floor circle, not the ossuary. But I felt the same thing, this need to take it, to possess it, to keep it close." We sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the city distant and unreal, like they were happening in another world. Then, Elena said, "Those prayers on the wall, the backwards ones. I've been thinking about them all evening. They're not just bindings to keep something in. They're warnings to keep something out, to keep anyone from touching what's inside. Every prayer says the same thing in different ways. Don't disturb the silver. Don't touch the payment. The guilt remains. The betrayal echoes. Death dwells here. Turn back. Turn back. Turn back." "You think the coins are dangerous?" "I think the coins are the point of everything. The whole tomb is designed around them. Think about it. Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. According to Matthew, he tried to return them, but the priests refused. They couldn't accept blood money back into the temple treasury. So Judas threw them down in the temple and left. The priests used that money to buy the field of blood, a burial ground for foreigners. That's the official story." "I know the story," I said, "but what if that's not what happened?" Elena pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and I realized she was shaking, trembling like she had a fever. What if the priests did take the money back? What if they took it and used it for a different purpose, to seal away the man who had betrayed God himself, to bury him with the same silver he had tried to return, so he could spend eternity with the physical evidence of his crime? The coins become a binding, a seal, a lock that keeps him trapped between life and death. That's speculation. We have no evidence, don't we? The tomb faces away from Jerusalem, the ossuary is face down, the prayers are written backwards to trap rather than protect. And there are 60 coins, Daniel, 30 in the circle, 30 in the box. Double payment. What if the first 30 were the original betrayal money, and the second 30 were payment to seal him in? Payment to the men who carried him to the tomb, who sealed him alive in the darkness. "Alive," I repeated, the word catching in my throat. The inscription on the lid. "I cannot die." What if that's not metaphorical? What if he literally couldn't die? What if the guilt was so massive, so overwhelming that it wouldn't let him die? So they sealed him in, still breathing, still conscious, and left him with the silver that caused it all. The ultimate punishment, eternal awareness of what he'd done, with no escape, no death, no relief. I wanted to argue, to find rational explanations, but I was remembering the dream I'd had in the vision. The feeling of hanging from the tree without dying, of lying in the field with my intestines exposed but still conscious, still aware, still guilty. "If you're right," I said slowly, "then what are we carrying in our pockets? What have we taken from that tomb?" "Pieces of him," Elena said, "pieces of his guilt, his betrayal, his inability to die. The coins aren't just metal, they're vessels. They carry what he was, what he became, and now we're carrying it too." The nightmares started that night, vivid and visceral, in a way that normal dreams never are. I dreamed I was Judas, standing in the temple courtyard. Marble columns rose around me, gleaming white in the harsh sunlight. The smell of incense and burning offerings hung thick in the air, mixed with the coppery smell of sacrificial blood. And in my hands was the leather purse containing 30 pieces of silver. I threw the coins at the feet of the chief priests, the leather tearing open, the silver scattering across the polished stone floor with that same clinking sound I'd heard beneath the earth. The sound echoed off the temple walls, multiplying, becoming a chorus of accusation, each clink a voice saying, "Betrayer, betrayer, betrayer." "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," I heard myself say, my voice breaking with anguish, with a grief so profound it felt like my chest was caving in. What is that to us? The priests turned away, their robes swirling, their faces carefully blank, refusing to acknowledge what their money had purchased. "That's your responsibility, your sin, your burden. We want nothing to do with it. The blood is on your hands, not ours." I wanted to gather up the coins to take back the betrayal by taking back the payment, but my hands wouldn't work. My fingers wouldn't close. Some force beyond my control kept my hands open, kept me from touching the silver I cast away. I could only stand there, watching the coins gleam on the stones like drops of mercury, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting my own broken face, watching the priests walk away, leaving me alone with my guilt and my blood money, and my crushing realization of what I'd done. Then the scene shifted. I was in the field of blood, that barren plot of land outside Jerusalem's walls. The earth was red, stained with iron oxide, or perhaps with the blood of everyone who'd ever been betrayed. I had a rope, coarse hemp that bit into my palms as I worked. The tree above me was dead, leafless, its branches reaching toward a sky that was neither day nor night but some grey space between, some liminal zone where time didn't flow properly. I threw the rope over a branch and fashioned a noose, my fingers working automatically, muscle memory from a childhood, learning sailors' knots on the shores of Galilee. I placed the noose around my neck. The rope was rough against my skin, scratching and burning, and I welcomed the pain, welcomed anything that might distract from the guilt. I kicked away the stone beneath my feet. The fall was short, the rope caught, but my neck didn't break cleanly like it should have. Instead, I hung there, choking, drowning in air, my body convulsing as it tried desperately to breathe. Minutes passed, 5, 10, 15. I counted them in the spaces between attempted breaths, each second an eternity of suffering. I couldn't die. The rope held, but death wouldn't come. My vision would darken, consciousness would start to slip away, and then I'd snap back to full awareness, back to full sensation, back to the choking and the burning and the guilt. This was my punishment. Not death, but the denial of death. Eternal suffering without the mercy of oblivion. Finally, after what might have been hours, or might have been days, time having lost all meaning, the rope broke. Not from my weight, but from its own decay, as if time had accelerated just for those fibers, as if the universe itself was tired of watching me suffer. I fell to the hard ground and felt something inside me rupture. My abdomen burst open from the impact, and I watched with detached horror as my own intestines spilled onto the dry earth like grey ropes, like the rope I'd just escaped. Like everything in the world had become ropes binding me to my guilt. But I was still alive, still conscious, still aware of every sensation. The pain was beyond description, beyond the capacity of language to convey. I tried to gather my organs back into my body, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Tried to push them back where they belonged, but they kept sliding out, slick and warm and wrong, refusing to stay where anatomy dictated they should be. The silver coins from my purse had scattered in the fall, and they lay gleaming among my entrails, 30 pieces of accusation nestled in my own body, 30 witnesses to my betrayal. I could see my reflection in their polished surfaces, see my face twisted in agony and guilt and something worse than either. I could see what I'd become. Not a man anymore, but a living example of what happens when you betray the infinite for the finite. I must return them, I heard myself saying, my voice a wet rasp. I must return them, but no one will take them. No one wants them. The silver is cursed, and so am I. We're bound together forever, the betrayal and the betrayer, the payment and the paid. We cannot be separated. We cannot die. I tried to stand, tried to gather the coins, tried to walk back toward Jerusalem to find someone, anyone who would accept them and release me from this burden. But my legs wouldn't work, damaged beyond repair. I could only crawl, dragging my torn body across the field, leaving a trail of blood and organs behind me, the coins clutched in my fists like they were the most precious things in the world, like they were the only things that mattered, like they were pieces of my own soul, scattered and waiting to be reunited. I woke up screaming. It was 4:47 in the morning, according to my watch. I was drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest, like it wanted to abandon ship before the vessel sank completely, and my left arm burned with a pain that felt like fire and ice combined, like I'd been branded with frozen metal. I turned on my flashlight with shaking hands and looked down. Shallow cuts covered my forearm from wrist to elbow, parallel lines scratched into my skin with something sharp. They were precise, deliberate, evenly spaced. I counted them, already knowing the number before I finished. 30. I had 30 scratches on my arm, and I had no memory of making them. No memory of even waking up during the night. I searched my tent frantically for whatever I'd used to cut myself. A knife, a piece of metal, anything with an edge. But there was nothing. My knife was still in its sheath on my belt, blade clean. My keys were smooth and rounded. The tent stakes were outside. Whatever had made these cuts was gone, or had never existed in any physical sense. Or perhaps I'd done it with my own fingernails, clawing at my arm in my sleep like a dreaming animal. The coin in my pocket felt heavier than before, as if it had gained mass during the night, as if my blood had fed it somehow, given it more substance, more reality. I pulled it out and looked at it in the flashlight beam. Just silver. Just an ancient coin. But when I held it, I could feel the weight of 2,000 years of guilt pressing down through the metal. Could feel Judas's desperate need to return it, to pass it on, to be free of its burden. By morning, I convinced myself of rational explanations. The scratches were from thornbush when we'd been surveying the area, and I just hadn't noticed them until now. The nightmare was just stress manifesting as night terrors, my subconscious processing the disturbing things we'd found. The coin was just an ancient artifact, nothing more. I was a rational man, a scientist, an academic, I didn't believe in curses or haunted silver, or the persistence of souls across millennia, but my hands still shook when I made coffee, and I couldn't stop touching the coin, and somewhere deep in my mind, I heard counting. 1, 2, 3, 30 pieces, start again. Thomas was already up, reviewing the photographs on his laptop. He looked worse than I felt, if that was possible. Dark circles under his eyes like bruises, his movements jerky and uncertain, his hands trembling slightly as he clicked through images. He hadn't shaved, and his beard was coming in patchy and grey, making him look 10 years older than he had yesterday. "Rough night?" I asked, sitting down next to him with my coffee, the mug warm in my hands. Couldn't sleep, kept hearing coins, counting over and over. 30 pieces, pause, 30 pieces, pause, like a metronome, like a heartbeat, like time itself being measured in silver. He didn't look up from the screen, his eyes bloodshot and fixed on the images. "Daniel, look at this. Something's wrong with the photographs. Something changed between when we took them and now." He turned the laptop toward me. It showed one of the photos we'd taken inside the chamber, a wide shot of the ossuary with the silver circle around it. But something was different about the image. The coins seemed to glow faintly in the photograph, giving off their own light despite there being no light source that could create that effect. It wasn't lens flare or reflection. It was as if the silver itself was luminous, radioactive, pulsing with some inner fire. "Camera glitch?" I suggested, though I knew it wasn't. "Maybe, but look at this one." He clicked to another image. This one showed the inside of the ossuary, the bones and the 30 coins scattered among them. And in this photo, the skull appeared to be looking directly at the camera. Not just positioned that way, but actually looking, as if it had turned its empty eye sockets toward us at the moment the shutter clicked. The angle was wrong for how we'd left it, impossible based on where the camera had been positioned, defying the laws of perspective and geometry. "It's pareidolia," I said, my voice lacking conviction. "We see faces where there are none. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to see eyes and mouths in random arrangements. It's human nature, evolutionary psychology. We see predators in shadows, faces in clouds, meaning in chaos." "And this?" Another photo. This one showed the wall carvings, the backwards prayers. But in the digital image, the letters seemed to move slightly, writhing like living things, like worms under skin, like the prayers themselves were trying to escape the stone that held them. I watched for a full minute, and I swear the characters shifted position, rearranging themselves into new configurations, spelling out warnings I couldn't quite read. I closed the laptop, unable to look anymore. The camera was malfunctioning. The electronics were going crazy down there, remember? These are just artifacts of a failing sensor, digital noise being interpreted as movement, compression errors, data corruption. "You're right," Thomas said, but he didn't sound convinced. He sounded like a man trying to convince himself of something he desperately wanted to believe. "Of course you're right. Just equipment failure in a high-moisture environment with unusual mineral deposits. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible." Elena emerged from her tent looking equally exhausted. Her hair was tangled, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had that 1,000-yard stare I'd seen in soldiers with PTSD. She had her notebook open, pages covered in cramped handwriting, notes and references and translations that must have taken hours. The obsessive research mode she got into when something fascinated or troubled her. I couldn't sleep, so I did some reading on my phone while I had signal. I found something interesting. She sat down at our makeshift table, spreading out her notes like tarot cards. Remember how the Gospel of Matthew says Judas hanged himself, but Acts says he fell and burst open? Scholars usually treat these as contradictory accounts, one of them wrong or embellished. But there's a non-canonical text, an apocryphal gospel fragment found in Egypt in the 1970s that reconciles them. It's called the Testament of Judas. "I'm not sure I want to hear this," Thomas muttered, but he was listening intently, leaning forward. Elena ignored him, her voice taking on that lecturing quality. According to this text, which scholars date to the 3rd or 4th century, but which may be based on earlier oral traditions, Judas didn't die from hanging. He survived the attempt, horribly injured, his trachea damaged, his internal organs displaced. He lived in agony, unable to eat or drink properly without choking, his body slowly failing, but death refusing to come. The text says he wandered for 3 days, trying to find someone who would kill him, who would end his suffering, but no one would touch him. He was ritually unclean, cursed, untouchable. Even beggars turned away from him. 3 days, I said, like Jesus in the tomb. The parallel is intentional. Exactly. The text draws explicit comparisons. While Jesus was experiencing death and resurrection, was harrowing hell and defeating death, Judas was experiencing death without end, suffering without release, guilt without absolution. Finally, on the 3rd day, the priests found him collapsed outside the temple gates. They were afraid he would recant his testimony, would claim he'd been coerced or manipulated, would reveal that they'd paid him to betray Jesus. So they paid 30 pieces of silver. A second 30 to have him taken to a place of shame and sealed in a tomb while still alive. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. They buried him alive. They buried him with the same silver he had tried to return, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was describing. As a curse, as a binding, as eternal punishment. The text says the priests believed that by sealing him with the coins, they were ensuring he could never speak of his betrayal, never reveal who had paid him or why. The silver would keep him silent forever, would bind his tongue even in death. But more than that, the text says the silver became part of him, that it fused with his guilt, with his inability to die, creating something new, something that would last as long as the coins lasted. That's a nightmare, not history, I said, but I was remembering the dream, remembering the feeling of being unable to die, trapped between life and death in endless agony. Is it? Look at the tomb we found. Look at the way it's constructed. She pulled out her own photographs, spreading them across the table like evidence at a trial. This isn't a burial chamber. This is a prison. Look at the entrance sealed from the outside with no way to open it from within. Look at the ossuary face down, a sign of desecration and contempt. Look at the coins arranged in a binding circle. And those wall carvings, prayers written backwards to trap rather than protect. This whole structure is designed to contain something, to keep something sealed away from the world. You're saying someone imprisoned him in there? Thomas said slowly, his face pale in the morning light. Alive. They sealed him in alive and left him to die in darkness, with only those coins for company, only his guilt for companionship. I'm saying the evidence supports it, and I'm saying we need to be very careful about what we do with the artifacts we've recovered, about what we tell Gregory, about who we allow to have access to these things. Because if the coins really do carry what the text suggests, if they really are vessels for Judas's guilt, then we haven't just stolen from a tomb. We've released something into the world that was meant to stay sealed forever. My phone buzzed. Gregory was calling. I answered it, walking away from the table to take the call. In private, though there was no such thing as privacy in our small camp. Daniel, excellent work. The photographs are extraordinary. Our client is absolutely thrilled with the documentation. Gregory's voice was tinny through the satellite connection, but I could hear the excitement, almost manic in its intensity. How quickly can you pack everything up and return to Jerusalem? The client wants to move forward immediately. We were planning on a few more days of documentation, maybe some additional survey work in the surrounding area. There might be related structures, other caves that could provide historical context. Change of plans. Our client wants everything immediately. The ossuary, the coins, all of it. They're sending transport tonight at 8 p.m. Can you have everything ready? Something about his tone bothered me. Too eager, too excited, like a gambler who just hit a jackpot and couldn't wait to collect. Gregory, who is our client, I think we have a right to know who we're delivering these artifacts to. This is historically significant material, possibly the most important biblical discovery in decades. It should be in a museum studied by scholars, not locked away in some private collection. A pause. That's not typically how we operate, Daniel. Client confidentiality is part of our service. You know that. This isn't a typical job. We found human remains, religiously and culturally significant artifacts. Before we hand them over to some anonymous collector, I want to know where they're going and what they're going to be used for. I think that's reasonable. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him breathing, hear the sound of him adjusting his glasses, a nervous habit he had when he was uncomfortable. Then, Gregory sighed, and I knew I'd won this small battle. All right, but this stays between us, understood? You don't share this information with anyone else, not even Elena and Thomas. Our client is a collector, yes, but also part of a spiritual organization. They call themselves the Order of Absolution. They believe the silver coins from Judas have unique properties. They believe whoever possesses them can transfer their guilt onto another person. Absolution through transference. They've been searching for these coins for decades, funding excavations across the Middle East, following every lead, every legend. This is their holy grail. My hand tightened on the phone. That's insane. They want to use these artifacts for some kind of spiritual ritual? That's faith, Daniel, or a version of it. This organization has members all over the world. Wealthy individuals seeking spiritual relief from their moral failings. CEOs who've destroyed companies and lives. Politicians who've betrayed their constituents. Criminals who've hurt people and can't live with what they've done. They pay enormous sums to touch artifacts they believe can cleanse them, can transfer their guilt to someone else and leave them spiritually clean. You're telling me we're robbing a tomb so rich people can feel better about their sins? So they can commit atrocities without consequence? I'm telling you we're fulfilling our contract. $3 million, Daniel, that's life-changing money for all of you. Enough to retire, to pursue any research you want, to never have to take another questionable job again. What happens to the people who touch these coins? In the manuscript Elena found, it said visitors to the tomb killed themselves. The old woman at the site told us about her uncle who hanged himself after searching for coins here. What happens to whoever receives this transferred guilt? Ancient superstition. Look, I don't care what these people believe. I care that they're willing to pay us. You want to walk away from this? Fine. But the company keeps all documentation, all photographs, all research. And you'll never work in this field again. Any of you. I'll make sure every university, every museum, every legitimate archaeological organization knows you're unreliable, that you can't be trusted to fulfill contracts. You'll be blacklisted, Daniel. Permanently. The threat was clear, unambiguous. I need to discuss this with my team. You have until tonight. Transport arrives at 8 p.m. Everything needs to be packed and ready. The ossuary, all 60 coins, all documentation. Don't disappoint me, Daniel. And don't make the mistake of thinking you can keep those coins you took from the chamber. Yes, I noticed. The photographs show gaps in the circle. 30 coins minus however many you and your team pocketed. Return them with everything else, or there will be consequences beyond losing your jobs. He hung up. I walked back to find Elena and Thomas locked in an intense conversation that stopped the moment they saw my face. I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of the coin in my pocket like an anchor, like a millstone, like one of those stones they tie to people before throwing them in the sea. Gregory wants everything tonight, I said, and I found out who our client is. They're a cult. They call themselves the Order of Absolution. They believe the coins can transfer guilt, that touching them provides some kind of spiritual cleansing by passing their sins onto someone else. They want to use them for rituals. That's not what they do, Elena said quietly, her voice absolutely certain, in a way that made my blood run cold. I've been researching all morning, cross-referencing everything I can find about these coins, about Judas, about the tomb, about guilt transference in ancient religious practices. Every historical account, every legend, every piece of folklore, they all agree on one thing. The coins don't absolve guilt. They multiply it. They spread it. Whoever touches them inherits a piece of Judas's betrayal, and then the guilt grows, feeds on itself, demands to be passed on like a disease demanding new hosts. Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against stone with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "I took 4 coins, he said. His voice was hollow, empty, like a man confessing sins he didn't have names for. Yesterday, from inside the ossuary. I thought they'd be worth something on the private market, could sell them separately for insurance, for security, for my daughter's college fund. But last night..." He trailed off, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else, like they'd committed crimes without his permission. "Last night what?" I prompted, though I already knew, had already experienced my own version of it. "Last night I dreamed I was betraying everyone I've ever loved. My parents who paid for my education, who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. My ex-wife who stood by me through the drinking years, through the deployments, through the nightmares. My daughter who still calls me daddy, even though I missed half her childhood, for jobs like this, for money, for the endless pursuit of enough that's never enough. I saw myself doing it, making the choice, choosing money over loyalty, comfort over truth, success over honor. And in the dream, I understood why Judas did it. I felt it from the inside. The rationalization, the way you can convince yourself anything, is justified if the reward is high enough, if the price is right, if you can just close your eyes to the consequences. He pulled the coins from his pocket and set them on the table with careful precision, like he was diffusing bombs. They gleamed in the morning sun, bright as mirrors, bright as accusations, bright as everything wrong with the world condensed into metal. When I woke up, I'd written something on the tent wall with my finger, pressing hard enough to leave marks in the fabric, hard enough that my fingertip was bleeding. Same phrase over and over, 30 times I wrote it. "What did you write?" Elena asked, though I suspected she already knew too. "The price was too high. The price was too high. The price was too high." He looked at us with haunted eyes, bloodshot and rimmed with red, with shadows beneath them that spoke of more than one sleepless night. "I don't know if I can give these to Gregory. I don't know what will happen if we let these coins out into the world, into the hands of people who think they can use them for absolution. If they end up in the hands of this cult, if dozens or hundreds of people start touching them, each one taking on guilt and passing it forward." Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out her own coins. 3 of them smaller than the others, mint dates that put them slightly later in the series, perhaps from a different batch, a different payment. "I took these yesterday afternoon, after you both left the chamber for the surface. I told myself it was for insurance, for security in case something went wrong with the official excavation, but really, I just wanted them. The moment I saw them, I knew I had to have them. It was like they were calling to me, like they knew my name, like they'd been waiting specifically for me to come and claim them. And," I prompted, "and last night I understood why. They're hungry, Daniel. The coins, or what lives in them, or what they represent. The guilt, Judas's guilt. It's so massive, so overwhelming, so infinite in scope, that it needs vessels to contain it. It needs people to carry it. These coins are how it spreads. Touch them, and you inherit a piece of that eternal betrayal. And then you feel this desperate need to pass it on to someone else by giving them the coin, by making them touch it, by spreading the curse forward like a contagion, like a virus that hijacks your cells and forces you to create more copies, more hosts, more carriers. I pulled my own coin from my pocket, just one, though I desperately wanted more. The urge to go back into the tomb and gather all 60 was almost unbearable, a physical need that made my fingers twitch and my chest ache, like withdrawal, like addiction, like the most profound longing I'd ever experienced. So what do? We can't give them to Gregory. We can't let them reach this cult. We seal it back up, Eleanor said, her voice taking on that fierce quality I recognized from when she'd defended her controversial paper at Yale, when she'd stood before a panel of academics and refused to back down, even when they threatened her career. We go back into the tomb, we return every coin we took, we reseal everything exactly as we found it. Then we bury the entrance. We cause a collapse, make it look natural, destroy all our documentation. We tell Gregory we found nothing. The tomb was empty, looted centuries ago. Our initial readings were wrong. He'll never believe that, Thomas said, gesturing at the laptop. We sent him photographs, clear documentation of everything we found. He's seen the ossuary, the coins, the inscriptions. He knows what's down there. Then we tell him we'll deliver everything tomorrow. Tonight we go back into the tomb one last time, and we put everything back exactly as we found it. We seal the entrance properly, and we leave this place. We walk away, and we never speak of it again. He'll send other people, I said, voicing the fear we were all dancing around, the elephant in our small camp. The moment he realizes we're not cooperating, he'll hire another team. Maybe a less scrupulous one, maybe people who won't care about the warnings, about the curse, about the consequences. This doesn't end just because we walk away. We'll just be delaying the inevitable, buying time we don't know how to use. Then we make sure no one can find it again, Elena said, and there was something almost frightening in her eyes now, a determination that bordered on fanaticism. We cause a collapse, make it look like natural erosion, like the site was structurally unstable. Bury the entrance under tons of rock. Even if someone knows the general location, they'd need months of excavation to reach the chamber again. Heavy equipment, permits, funding. And by then, maybe we can find a way to warn them, to make sure the world knows what we found and why it needs to stay buried. Thomas shook his head slowly, his military training warring with Elena's proposal. That could damage or destroy the site. Everything inside, the ossuary, the coins, the inscriptions, all of it. We'd be destroying an incredible archaeological find, a piece of biblical history that could rewrite what we know about Judas, about the crucifixion, about early Christianity, about how the first century Jews dealt with betrayal and guilt. Better destroyed than released into the world, Elena said, her voice hard as stone, as uncompromising as the backwards prayers carved into the tunnel walls. You felt what these coins do. You saw what they did to us after just one night, after minimal exposure. Imagine if that cult gets them. Imagine dozens, hundreds of people touching them, each one taking on that guilt and spreading it further. Each one becoming a little bit of Judas, carrying his betrayal forward through time like a relay race that never ends. How long before it spreads beyond the cult? How long before it infects entire communities, cities, countries? How long before the whole world is carrying pieces of the worst betrayal in human history? I looked at the coins on the table, 8 pieces of silver gleaming in the sun. Part of me wanted to argue, to find rational explanations for everything we'd experienced. Stress, suggestion, shared delusion, carbon monoxide poisoning from bad air in the tomb, psychological priming from the old woman's warnings. But I couldn't. I felt it too clearly. The weight of Judas's betrayal. pressing down through 2,000 years, heavy as stones, cold as death, real as the ground beneath our feet. Gregory said transport comes at 8 p.m, I said slowly, making the decision even as I spoke, feeling it crystallize in my mind like ice forming on still water. That gives us about 10 hours. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now. We need to return the coins, set charges to collapse the entrance, and be gone before anyone arrives. We need to erase our presence here completely. We gathered our equipment in silence, each of us moving with the automatic efficiency of people who'd done this work hundreds of times. Thomas packed the explosives we brought for clearing large rocks if needed. Not much, just enough for a controlled collapse. We'd set charges at key structural points in the tunnel, bring down the ceiling, seal the tomb permanently under tons of limestone. It wouldn't stop a determined excavation, but it would discourage casual exploration, buy us time, create obstacles. But first, we had to go back inside. We had to return the coins we'd taken, place them back in their positions in that perfect circle, close the ossuary lid properly, restore the binding we'd broken. We had to undo what we'd done, repair what we'd damaged, make amends to something we didn't fully understand. The descent into the tomb was worse the second time. The tunnel seemed narrower, the air thicker and harder to breathe, as if the earth itself was resisting our return, warning us away, trying to protect us from what waited below. Our headlamps caught the backwards prayers on the walls, and now I could read them all clearly. Could see the desperate warnings carved by hands that must have been terrified of what they were sealing into the earth. Do not disturb the silver. Do not touch the payment. The guilt remains eternal. The betrayal echoes through generations. Death dwells here. Turn back, turn back, turn back. The silver hungers. The silver remembers. The silver keeps what it takes. Over and over, carved by different hands in different scripts, different languages, different eras. Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, even Arabic from later centuries, as if the tomb had been visited multiple times over 2,000 years, each visitor adding their own warning, their own desperate attempt to prevent what we had just done, what countless others before us had probably done. This wasn't the first time the tomb had been opened. We weren't the first to take coins, we were just the latest in a long line of thieves and fools. We reached the chamber. The ossuary sat where we'd left it, lid slightly askew from our examination. But something had changed. The circle of coins on the floor wasn't just broken where we'd taken our 8. Other coins had moved or been scattered, the perfect ring disrupted in multiple places, as if something had been moving around in here after we left, as if the chamber had been active in our absence. "Something's been here," Thomas said, his voice tight with tension, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt. "Something moved the coins after we left. Look at the tracks in the dust." I knelt to examine the floor. He was right, there were marks in the dust, drag marks, as if something had pulled itself across the chamber floor. But they weren't footprints, they were more like... I couldn't find the right word, like something had crawled or slithered, or pulled itself along using hands that no longer worked properly. "Or they moved themselves," Elena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The binding's broken. It's been broken since we took the first coins. We haven't just stolen from a tomb, we've opened a door that was meant to stay closed. We've let something out, or let something in, or changed the structure of reality in ways we can't comprehend." We pulled out the coins we'd carried, 8 pieces of silver warm from our pockets, warm from our bodies, warm from the guilt they'd been feeding on. It felt wrong to let them go, like cutting off pieces of ourselves, like severing limbs, like abandoning children. But we placed them back in the circle, filling gaps, restoring what we'd broken, trying to repair 2,000 years of careful containment with our fumbling mortal hands. As the circle neared completion, the temperature dropped again. That same impossible cold, frost spreading across stone that should be too warm, too deep, too protected from external temperature changes, and from the ossuary came sounds. Not the wailing from before, but something worse. Breathing. Wet, laboured breathing. Like someone with fluid-filled lungs trying to draw air. Like someone drowning slowly in their own body. "We need to finish this," I said, placing my coin in the final gap. My hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "We need to close the circle and get out. Now." The moment the circle was complete, the breathing stopped. The cold stopped. Everything stopped. The silence was absolute, oppressive, like being underwater or buried alive, like all sound had been sucked from the world. Then, from the ossuary, came a voice. Not in Aramaic this time, in English, speaking directly to us, intimate as a confession, close as a whisper in the dark. "Thank you." We froze. The voice was soft, male, with an accent I couldn't place. Ancient but also timeless, as if the speaker existed outside the normal flow of time, as if he'd been speaking every language ever spoken all at once and we were only hearing the English, because that's what our minds could process. "For 2,000 years I have been bound here, sealed with the silver I tried to return, trapped with my guilt and my betrayal, and my endless dying. The priests thought they were punishing me, but they gave me something worse than punishment. They gave me eternity. They gave me consciousness without the mercy of death, awareness without the relief of oblivion. But you freed me, not by taking the coins, but by bringing them back, by choosing to return what was taken, by feeling the guilt and accepting it rather than passing it on. The skeleton in the ossuary hadn't moved, but I could feel presence emanating from it. Awareness, intelligence, consciousness. Something that had once been human and might still be, in some reduced and terrible way, in some form that transcended the physical boundaries of flesh and bone. "The curse was never in the silver," the voice continued, each word carefully chosen, deliberate, as if speech was difficult, as if communication across 2 millennia required enormous effort. "The curse was in the keeping, in the holding, in the refusal to let go. Every person who took coins from this tomb, who carried them into the world, they became like me, unable to die, unable to be free, trapped in their own guilt and betrayal, spreading it forward like a disease. But you returned them. You felt the curse and you chose to end it rather than spread it. That choice matters. That choice changes everything." "Who are you?" Elena whispered, though we all knew the answer, had known it from the moment we found the tomb. "You know who I am. You found my tomb, read my name, felt my guilt like it was your own. I am Judas Iscariot, betrayer of God, keeper of silver, prisoner of my own choices. I am the man who sold the infinite for the finite and spent eternity regretting it. I am the man who tried to return what couldn't be returned, who tried to undo what couldn't be undone, who tried to die but was denied even that mercy." "That's impossible," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction, lacked certainty, lacked any real belief in what he was saying. "You're dead. You died 2,000 years ago, your bones and dust and legend." The laugh that came from the darkness was sad rather than bitter, resigned rather than angry. "Did I? I hung from a tree but didn't die. I fell and burst but didn't die. They sealed me in darkness but still I didn't die. Death was my punishment, but death was denied me. I was sentenced to endure, to experience every moment of guilt and regret and crushing awareness of what I'd done. The silver kept me here, kept me conscious, kept me suffering. Not alive, not dead, but something between. Something worse than both." "Then why thank us?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We disturbed your tomb, took your coins, broke the binding. We made things worse. We let the curse out into the world." "No, you made things better. The binding was breaking anyway, slowly, eroding over centuries, weakening with time and exposure and the simple entropy of all things. Eventually someone would have found this place, someone who wouldn't have felt the guilt, who wouldn't have understood the curse, who wouldn't have had the moral strength to return what they took. They would have taken the coins and spread them across the world, infecting thousands with the betrayal, creating an epidemic of guilt that would spread exponentially. But you felt it, you understood it, and you chose to return them, to restore the binding, to keep the curse contained. That choice, that moral action in the face of temptation and greed, that may be enough to finally break the cycle. "So, we've trapped you again," Elena said, her voice breaking. "We've sentenced you to another 2,000 years of suffering. We've condemned you to eternal consciousness in this tomb, alone in the darkness with your guilt and your silver and your inability to die. Perhaps, or perhaps your choice has done something the original binding never could. You felt my guilt, my betrayal, and you didn't pass it on. You broke the cycle. You chose moral action over personal gain. That may be enough to finally free me. That may be enough to transform curse into blessing, binding into release. Time will tell. I have plenty of time." The presence began to fade, like heat dissipating, like smoke dispersing on the wind, like consciousness withdrawing into some deeper place we couldn't follow. The voice grew fainter, more distant, as if the speaker was moving away from us through dimensions we couldn't perceive. "A warning before I go. 8 coins are still missing. Not the ones you returned, but others, taken over the centuries by priests and pilgrims and thieves and scholars. They're out there in the world, in collections and museums and private hoards. Each one carries a piece of the curse. Each one spreads the betrayal to whoever touches it. Find them if you can. Return them if you're able. Break the cycle completely, coin by coin, piece by piece. Undo what should never have been done." "How?" I called out, my voice echoing off stone walls. "How do we find them? The world is vast, and 30 pieces of silver from the 1st century could be anywhere, could be in 1,000 different collections, could be lost forever." But the presence was gone. The cold receded like a tide going out. The chamber returned to normal temperature, normal pressure, normal reality. We were alone with a skeleton and 60 coins, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, 8 more pieces of cursed silver were waiting to be found, waiting to infect new hosts, waiting to spread the betrayal further. We sealed the chamber as best we could, using the portable concrete we brought to fill cracks and gaps, making it as secure as possible. Then we placed the explosives at key structural points in the tunnel, carefully calculated positions that would bring down the ceiling without destroying the chamber itself, that would seal rather than obliterate, that would protect rather than annihilate. We climbed back through the tunnel system, emerging into the Valley of Hinnom, just as dawn was breaking. Jerusalem glowed gold in the early light, eternal and beautiful and indifferent to our small drama, to our choices, to our suffering. The city had seen countless betrayals, countless curses, countless attempts at redemption. Ours was just one more in a long history. We stood there for a long moment, exhausted and filthy, and somehow lighter despite everything we'd experienced, despite the weight we still carried, despite the knowledge of what remained undone. "So what now?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse from breathing dust and fear. "Now we try to find the other coins," Elena said, and there was determination in her voice that I recognized, the same determination that had driven her research, that had cost her her academic position, that defined who she was at her core. "We spend the rest of our lives hunting for 8 pieces of silver scattered across the world. We become the guardians of a curse, the keepers of a secret, the inheritors of a betrayal that happened 2,000 years ago." "That's insane," Thomas said, but he was smiling slightly, a grim smile that acknowledged the absurdity and the necessity. We'll never find them. They could be anywhere. In the Vatican archives, in the British Museum, in some collector's basement in Nebraska, in a pawn shop in Manila. We don't even know what we're looking for beyond 1st century Tyrian shekels, and there are thousands of those in collections worldwide. Then we'll search everywhere, I said, feeling the decision settle into my bones like the frost had settled in the chamber. We broke the tomb, we took the coins, we inherited this responsibility. Maybe that was always the point. Maybe that's why we found the tomb in the first place. Maybe some things are meant to be found precisely so they can be properly hidden again. We set off the charges at 7:30 a.m, well before Gregory's transport would arrive. The explosion was controlled, precise, calculated to do exactly what we needed. The slope above the tomb entrance slumped, then collapsed inward like a sinkhole opening, like the earth reclaiming what had always been its own. Tons of limestone and soil poured into the void, filling the tunnel, burying the entrance, sealing the chamber beneath hundreds of tons of rock. The collapse continued for almost a minute, spreading wider than we'd anticipated, the whole hillside reshaping itself in a slow-motion avalanche. When the dust finally settled, there was no sign that anything had ever been there. No entrance, no tunnel, just a natural-looking rockslide that could have happened any time in the last 1,000 years, that would take months to excavate, that would discourage all but the most determined treasure hunters. "It's done," Thomas said quietly, and the words had the weight of prayer, of benediction, of finality. No one's getting into that chamber again, not without months of excavation and heavy equipment. Not without answering a lot of questions about why they're digging here. We packed up the camp in silence, loading everything into the truck. By 8 a.m, when Gregory's transport was scheduled to arrive, we were miles away, driving back toward Jerusalem with empty hands and heavy consciences and a mission we'd never asked for, but couldn't refuse. My phone rang at 8:15. Gregory. I didn't answer. He called twice more, then gave up. A text message arrived. "Where are you? Transport is here. Call me immediately." Then another. "Daniel, this is serious. Our client is furious. Call me now." I turned off my phone. Elena and Thomas did the same. We'd made our choice. Now we'd live with the consequences. We drove to Jerusalem, checked into a hotel under false names, paid cash, left no digital trail. We sat in my room trying to figure out what to do next. How do you explain to your employer that you destroyed a $3 million discovery? How do you explain that you did it because ancient coins were haunted? Because a 2,000-year-old skeleton spoke to you? Because the right thing to do was sometimes the hardest thing to do? "He'll come after us," Thomas said, stating the obvious. "Gregory, the company, the client. They'll want answers, explanations. They'll want us to pay for what we destroyed, to compensate for their losses, to face consequences." "Let them try," Elena said, and there was steel in her voice, the same steel that had let her stand up to the Yale Academic Board, that had let her defend her controversial research that made her who she was. "What are they going to do, sue us? Take us to court? They'd have to explain what we found, admit they were dealing in stolen artifacts, reveal their client's identity and intentions. They won't risk that. They'll write it off as a loss and move on." "We still have the problem of the missing coins," I said. 8 pieces of silver somewhere in the world. 8 pieces of Judas's curse waiting to spread. Elena pulled out her laptop, the one device we'd kept, though we'd deleted all the tomb photographs, destroyed all the evidence. "I've been thinking about that. If coins were taken over the centuries, there should be records. Museum acquisition logs, private collection inventories, auction house records. These are Tyrian shekels from a very specific time period, 20, 30 CE, with specific characteristics. If we're looking for ones with unusual provenances, with stories of curses or strange effects on their owners, we might be able to narrow it down." She pulled up a database of ancient coin collections. I'm going to start with major museums. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Israel Museum, the Vatican. Then move to private collections we can access through academic channels. Then auction records from the major houses. If we're systematic, if we're thorough, we might be able to track them down. Thomas pulled out his own laptop. I'll focus on the archaeological black market. I still have contacts from my time in Iraq. People who deal in looted antiquities. If coins from this tomb made it into private hands, there might be whispers, rumours, stories about unlucky collectors. I looked at them both, these people I'd worked with for years, who'd become something more than colleagues, who'd chosen moral action over personal gain, who'd walked away from $3 million to do the right thing. This could take years, decades even. We might never find them all. Then we spend years, Elena said simply, decades, however long it takes. We broke the seal. We have to repair what we damaged, even if it takes the rest of our lives. Gregory called one more time 3 days later. His voicemail was different, confused rather than angry, uncertain rather than furious. Daniel, I don't understand what happened. My client pulled out of the deal completely. They said they received a message, a spiritual warning that the coins were too dangerous to possess, that touching them would bring only suffering. They've withdrawn their offer completely. The company's decided to write off the entire expedition as a loss. The site collapsed anyway, probably unstable from our excavation. I don't know what you did, but call me. We need to talk about your futures with the firm. There might still be a place for you, if you can explain what happened. I deleted the voicemail, without listening to the rest. There was no going back to that life, to that work, to that version of myself. We'd crossed a line, seen something we couldn't unsee, felt something we couldn't unfeel. We were different people now. We split up after that first week. Elena went to Cairo to research museum collections that might contain Tyrian shekels from the 1st century. Thomas went to Rome to search church archives and Vatican holdings. I stayed in Jerusalem, digging through university libraries and antiquities dealer inventories, looking for any trace of silver coins with the right provenance, the right date, the right weight of history. That was 3 months ago. We stay in touch through encrypted messages, sharing leads and theories and the occasional breakthrough. Elena found one coin in a private collection in Egypt, in the estate of a man who'd killed himself after inheriting it from his grandfather. The family was eager to be rid of it, called it cursed, practically gave it to Elena for free. Thomas tracked another to a monastery in Greece, where it had been kept in a reliquary for centuries, never touched, surrounded by prayers and protective symbols. I located a third in an antiquities shop in the old city of Jerusalem, of all places, sitting in a display case priced at 3,000 shekels, the shopkeeper unaware of what he possessed, only knowing that everyone who'd handled it felt strange afterward. We returned them to the tomb one at a time, accessing it through the tunnel system we'd found, the back entrance that bypassed the collapsed main tunnel. We placed them back in the circle, restoring the binding piece by piece, repairing what centuries of theft and curiosity and greed had broken. 5 more coins to find. 5 more pieces of the curse to contain. I still dream about Judas sometimes, about standing in the Garden of Gethsemane with silver in my purse and betrayal on my lips. But the dreams are different now. Less crushing, less overwhelming, more instructive, more teaching than tormenting. In the dreams, I see the choices he made, the rationalizations, the small compromises that led to unthinkable actions. And I learn from them. I see how easy it is to betray everything you believe in for the right price, how simple it is to convince yourself that wrong is right if the reward is high enough. The guilt is still there. It will always be there, I think. You can't touch something that cursed without being changed by it, without carrying a piece of it forward. But it's manageable now. It's a weight I can carry, rather than a burden that crushes me. It's a reminder rather than a prison. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point all along. Not to find the tomb, or document the discovery, or return the coins, but to feel the guilt, to understand the betrayal, to carry the weight of terrible choices and learn how to live with it without passing it on to others, without spreading it forward, without perpetuating the cycle. That's what Judas could never do. He couldn't live with what he'd done. He couldn't accept the guilt without trying to return it, undo it, escape it. He tried to give back the silver, but no one would take it. He tried to die, but death was denied him. He was trapped in an eternal present of regret and remorse, unable to move forward or back, frozen in the moment of his worst choice. But maybe we can do what he couldn't. Maybe we can feel the guilt and still choose to do better. Maybe we can inherit the betrayal without perpetuating it. Maybe we can break cycles instead of continuing them, heal wounds instead of inflicting them, choose moral action instead of personal gain. That's what I tell myself anyway, on the bad nights when the dreams are vivid and the guilt feels fresh as yesterday, when I wake up with scratches on my arm or phrases written on the walls or the taste of copper in my mouth. That's the story I cling to when I wonder if we did the right thing, if we should have destroyed the coins instead of returning them, if we've just delayed the inevitable spread of a curse that can never truly be contained. I'm recording this in my Jerusalem hotel room, the same room where I started this confession 3 months ago. Tomorrow, I leave for Istanbul. Elena found a lead on coin number 16, or what might be coin number 16 being held in a museum's private collection. A Tyrian shekel from 26 CE with an unusual provenance, acquired from a dealer in Jerusalem in 1947, right around the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery. The museum documentation notes that 3 different curators who handled it took early retirement for health reasons, though the details are vague. If we're right, if our research is accurate, if our intuition is sound, this could be one of the missing 8. Or it could be nothing, another dead end, another coin that looks right but feels wrong. We've followed dozens of false leads already, but we have to check. We have to be thorough. We have to do this right. If you're watching this, if something happens to me, or Elena, or Thomas, know that we tried. Know that we chose to carry this burden, rather than pass it on. Know that some discoveries should never see light. Some tombs should never be opened. Some silver should never be spent. Some prices are too high to pay. The Valley of Hinnom still exists just south of Jerusalem's old city. The tomb is still there, buried under tons of rock and sealed with concrete and protected by backwards prayers that trap rather than guard. Judas Iscariot rests there still, or his bones do at least, surrounded by silver coins that gleam in the darkness and carry the weight of the worst betrayal in human history. Don't go looking for it. Don't try to find it. If you somehow stumble across it, if some earthquake or construction project exposes the entrance again, don't enter. Don't touch the silver. Don't disturb what we worked so hard to seal. Some prices are too high to pay. Some guilt is too heavy to carry. Some betrayals echo forever, passed from person to person like a contagion. Like a curse, like 30 pieces of silver that burn in your pocket and whisper in your dreams and never, ever let you forget what you've become. Unless you choose to break the cycle, unless you choose to return what was taken, unless you choose moral action over personal gain, sacrifice over reward, the hard right over the easy wrong. I'm done now. I've told you everything. The discovery, the curse, the choice we made, and the burden we carry. Tomorrow, I hunt for another coin. Tomorrow, I try to undo what we started when we found that tomb. Tomorrow, I take one more step toward redemption or damnation or whatever waits at the end of this path. But tonight, I'm going to sleep. And if Judas visits my dreams again, I'll listen. I'll learn. I'll try to understand what 2,000 years of guilt can teach someone about choices and consequences and the weight of betrayal. Because betrayal doesn't have to be eternal. Guilt doesn't have to be infinite. Curses can be broken, one coin at a time, one choice at a time, one act of moral courage at a time. That may not seem like much, but it's something. And sometimes something is enough. I reach over and turn off the camera. The red light blinks out. In my pocket, I feel the weight of nothing at all. For now, I carry no coins. For now, I'm free of that particular burden. My arm is healed. The scratches faded to white scars that I can explain away as accidents, as thornbush, as the occupational hazards of archaeology. But tomorrow I'll hunt for another one, and when I find it, I'll hold it, feel its curse, understand its guilt, accept its weight. Then I'll carry it back to the Valley of Hinnom, back to the tomb we disturbed, back to the darkness where it belongs, back to the binding we're restoring piece by piece. One coin at a time, one betrayal contained at a time, one small victory against entropy and evil, and the human capacity for doing wrong. It's not much, but it's honest work. And maybe that's what redemption looks like, not dramatic transformation, not sudden absolution, but the patient, grinding work of repairing what you've broken, of returning what you've taken, of choosing better even when better is harder. 5 more coins to find, 5 more pieces of an ancient betrayal to contain, 5 more chances to get it right. And after that, after we return all 60, restore the binding completely, seal the tomb properly for whatever time we have left. I don't know, maybe we'll finally be free. Maybe Judas will finally be able to rest. Maybe the guilt that's haunted humanity for 2 millennia will finally fade. Or maybe we'll discover there are more coins than we thought. Maybe the betrayal goes deeper than we imagined. Maybe this work never ends and we're committed to it for the rest of our lives. Either way, we'll do what needs to be done. Because some burdens, once accepted, can't be put down. Some responsibilities, once understood, can't be ignored. Some choices, once made, define who you become. We chose this. We chose to return, rather than to keep, to repair rather than to profit, to do right rather than to do easy. And I'd make the same choice again. Every time. No matter the cost. Because that's the difference between us and Judas. He couldn't live with his choice, so he spent eternity dying from it. We're choosing to live with ours, to carry it forward, to transform curse into mission and guilt into purpose. 1 coin at a time, 1 choice at a time, 1 day at a time, until all the silver is returned, until all the betrayals are sealed away, until the cycle is finally, completely broken. That's my promise. To Judas, to ourselves, to whatever divine or cosmic force set us on this path. We'll finish what we started. No matter how long it takes. No matter what it costs. No matter where it leads. The betrayal may echo forever, but so will our choice to end it. And maybe, in the end, that will be enough.